Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about difficult concepts. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, how would you learn a new concept that you find difficult to wrap your head around? Well, I would first and foremost do like a high level thing. The first, just get like an introduction to the concept. It's usually a book or a blog article, or more often than not a video or some tutorial or something like that. That gives me an introduction, a course for example. When I have the high level understanding of sort of, alright, this is sort of what this thing is about, then I break down the problem that I'm trying to solve. It's the divide and conquer thing that you've heard about, into very small pieces, and then I take my time experimenting with each individual piece, and I try to understand how that little piece works and how that thing is insignificant for the other stuff that's going to happen further down. Let me break this down a little bit. So let's think about, I don't know, a car. And let's think about if we wanted to build our own car. Well, it's going to be very difficult if you just look at a car as it looks like today. If you don't know nothing about building cars, how would you figure out how to build that thing? Well, the first thing is sort of to just look at the thing and look at, okay, at a high level, sort of almost like a monkey with the violin. You're sort of like just examining this thing. You're kind of walking around, okay, there's a trunk here, there's some wheels, there's a steering wheel, some seats, right? You're sort of just high level maneuvering around and looking at all the components from your perspective, of course, the things that you can see. And then you go, all right, cool. Then these are the things that I can see. I understand what these things sort of are. I'm not 100% sure how they were made or anything like that, but I think I sort of get it, right? And then you start taking stuff apart. So now when you understand at a high level what a car is made up of, you start to pull away some of these components that are that make up the car, and then you start looking at that component itself, and you kind of go, okay, here is an engine, all right, it fits in here, and it does all of that. I mean, this is of course very high level still, and it sort of works this way. It takes, like, it's a combustion thing, and you sort of just play around with it, and you poke it with a stick to sort of understand how the engine works, and then you might look at the wheels, do a similar sort of thing. And in software development, I do exactly the same thing. I take something that is a big concept, I just need to understand sort of how the big picture thing that I'm trying to do works, because when I then start disassembling things and sort of looking at each little piece that make up the whole, I know I still have a good mental picture of the big thing that this fits into. Because if you don't really understand like the high level concept, if you just look at, I don't know, if I give you a screw and I ask you what is the significance of this screw in the larger scheme of things, it's not going to be very useful to you, because you don't, like, it's just a screw. It could be fitted into anywhere, right? You don't know what you're making with that thing. So how do you know how to think about this problem if you don't understand that it's going to be in a building or a toy or something like that, right? It's very difficult to mentally picture that, right? So you need that big context first. But once you have it, you can start to just look at each of these individual pieces, and that's where experimentation is very useful. So when I first started being a software developer, something that I always did, which I thought was extremely useful, was that you learn about, let's say you learn about HTML, right? If you're going to be a web developer, and you sort of learn high level what it is. Okay, there's like a bunch of tags in a file somewhere, and they mean different things, and there are different names and so forth. And so you sort of go and learn and go and read about it, and you go, oh, okay, this is the tag, it works this way. There's this like a list, and this is like a image, a video, etc., 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 right? And then what you do is that you start experimenting and playing around with it a little bit. You create your own, or I did. I created my own HTML file, and I go, okay, let's see. Okay, I need a HTML tag, opening and closing, and then like a head or something like that, and there's like a body, and then in the body, let's just put like a div and write hello world in that. And then let's open that file in my browser, because that's where it lives, right? That's where the file lives. And I did, and it looked very big. Or no, sorry, it was an H1 tag. So I put a foobar or a hello world in an HD1 tag, and it was super big. Text was super big. And then I tried an H2 tag. Okay, now the text went smaller. And then a third, like a H3 tag. Okay, now it's even smaller. Oh, okay, so there's like H number tags or something like that, and that sort of means that if it's an H1, the text is big, and then it gets smaller the further down I go. Okay, I sort of think I understand what that means. And then you put in another tag, like an image. Okay, cool. You put like a property thing here, which is like a source or something, right? And then that gets an image. That's the process. It sounds silly, but that is the same damn... It's like the best process I've ever used in order to understand a very difficult concept. You literally just take out a very small piece of the big problem and poke it with sticks until you start seeing a pattern. Even if that pattern is incorrect, it's actually, I argue, it's very similar to, this is one of the, I love this discussion about the scientific process versus religion, and I make the very clumsy analogy to that religious belief is actually part, in a way, it is the earlier stages of the scientific mindset where you observe something and you create a hypothesis, and at its very base principle, well, if you see lightning, you see all these things, what are you going to assume? Well, you don't really know how any of this work, so maybe there's like a magical man, well, it's usually a man, but sometimes a woman, who's doing something up there. It might be Thor or Zeus or whoever, right? It's not that much of like the thing that is missing there is that even though you know you cannot possibly know the things that we know now back in those days, you can still sort of have the right idea, even though you don't really have any definitive proof for it. And there are many examples of people who have had they have had the wrong interpretation of why something works a certain way. But it just served as a mental tool. They could still get a good end result, and it's the same thing for you as a software developer. You don't have to know absolutely everything in super detail of how things work at all times, because you have to start somewhere. As I was saying with the H system, like anybody who knows how the H1 tags and so forth works knows that this way I described it is like, oh yeah, the text gets bigger or smaller. Yeah, that is true. But you could also use CSS to fix that. The H1 tags have more semantic meaning, like there's a lot more to those tags than just the text gets bigger. But as a complete beginner, someone who is like, as I said, it's a monkey with a violin, I'm sort of just looking and like fiddling around with it, trying to figure out like some base pattern. I can still use this in some meaningful way now. I can use an H1 tag to make the text big, H2 to make it smaller, etc., etc. And then I learn how an image works, and I continue. And I do that for literally everything. And the smarter you get and the more knowledgeable you get, the bigger, like the more like of these minor details you can skip and sort of make bigger experiments. And all of a sudden you sit there and go, well, I've been working for many years and I want to build a web server in this cool new language called Go or Rust or something like that. Maybe I should make a little API or like or something like that. Let's make an SPA or etc. And you now realize that you've actually gotten to a point where a small experiment for you is a full-fledged application for a complete beginner. So what I want you to take away from this is that the way that I deal with concepts that I find very difficult to wrap my head around is that I first get an introduction to the big picture stuff. So I understand sort of the value, sort of why this is the way it is, how it works, etc., at a highly conceptual level. And then I take my time disassembling the pieces and just trying to understand how each piece of the thing works, so that I can play around with it, poke it with a stick a little bit, run my own tiny little silly experiments. It's the same thing with math, really, or anything that you want to learn. Like, you might not be able to start with a gigantic equation or something like that. Just fuck that. Let's look at addition. Okay, subtraction, multiplication. You look at these tiny pieces, and when you sort of know how that works, you try to fit that understanding into the next piece, and then you look at both those pieces together. Okay, so that piece I understand the other piece, and how do they work together now? You just try to. It's sort of, as I said, like you're trying to. It's like a monkey with a violin. You're just trying to find a pattern to the thing, or with like these like these toys when you try to fit them into the right slot, right? Same deal. You're just trying to figure out how does these things fit into the box or whatever. Exactly, that is literally how I do it. And as I said, it's not that going to be that long until you actually get to a point where you realize that your experiments are actually fairly serious applications for people who are maybe not as experienced with certain things. And that is, well, congratulations, you're getting smarter, and now your experiments become more complicated, but to you it's still like sort of fitting the right, like the triangle in the triangle slot or the circle in the circle slot. Have a great day.